welcome everyone to the August 30th, 20 service Zoom event of the North Texas Church of Freethought. It's really a pleasure to be meeting with all once again. Last time I mentioned the Adam and Eve story, being indoctrinated as a Catholic into good. I learned that this story, a story of course was told to me as a truth, was one of crime and punishment. Adam and Eve were told not to eat some forbidden fruit and that would die if they did, but they did it anyway. And Christians have to have it that way to get original sin and every other kind of sin as well. And this is why everyone needs what Christians are selling, redemption through blood magic sacrifice. But you have to believe in it all for the magic to work. It's not like on an airplane, you have to believe in the laws of aeronautic. You have to believe in the Christians thing. If you don't believe, then you're not saved and you're tortured for eternity. And of course, we all know this. We all have been taught, meanwhile, the Jews, whose book it is, don't have this idea of original sin and needing a blood magic sacrifice. When I found that out as a boy, the Catholic school where I went to school marched about a block away to where there was a synagogue. I was just very puzzled. I mean, how people disagree about basic facts like the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve? That was what I'm told. What did the Jews think about their book being called the Old Testament? And why weren't they Catholics anyway? Muslims, by the way, also do not go along with the original business. So that was the beginning of my learning about this thing called religion, and I'm still learning. At some point, I read the Bible. A lot of it is boring, of course, but Genesis creation story is just a few pages out of a lot, if not over 1,000 pages, the King James Version. This story has a certain charm, and if you read it carefully and consider what's going on, it doesn't look like a story of crime and punishment. Yet the story is that Adam and Eve are responsible for the crimes of every criminal monster, every petty thief and shoplifter that ever lived. So why don't Eve come off like Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, Bundy, all rolled into? Instead, they come off as, at worst, tragic. To begin with, Genesis 1 and 2 are clearly two creation stories together. Many of you already know that. First, there are the famous, if any of you have not muted, it would be good to mute. We're getting some extraneous sound. So first, there's this famous 6 days of creation, which various things are made in an order that makes little sense. Of course, our distant ancestors who made up stories did not know of the sequence of living organisms that are shown on fossil record. How could they know that? So, nevertheless, suppose plants made on the third day could survive another day until the fourth day when it was made. And then people were made and, quote, male and female created he them, it says. Some say that that means that the first people were actually hermaphrodites. That's not canon. But then after that, God makes man. It is not good that the man should be alone. Why is this? God is there, so Adam, the first man, is not. So then after that, quote, God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. But for Adam, there was not found an help meet for him. How sad. But I mean, what? God thought some beast or bird would be a suitable companion for Adam? Really? So then God anesthetizes Adam, removes one of the ribs. I guess the word used is side, could also be translated side. And then the first woman was made, Eve. Whoever is clearing their throat and has not muted themselves, would you please mute yourself? So Adam approves of Eve, so now he's got to help meet. But God had to find this all out through trial and error? Did not God make the animals, male and female? So plot holes abound. That there are two creation stories have been well known for a long time. This was very obvious to our ancestors. And this is especially important after the European discovery of the Americas, because at that time, the Bible was looked to as the most important source of all knowledge about everything. And nowhere did the Bible explain where the native peoples of the Americas, who ran around shamelessly naked, no fig leaves for them, remember, where those people had come from. The 7th century French lawyer and Calvinist theologian Isaac Laperriere wrote a book in 1655 in which he set out the case that people had been created before Adam and Eve, and that those two were only ancestors of the Jews. This would account for where the Native Americans came from and also supplied a basis for developing ideas of race that were coming up at the time. And we know how much misery those ideas brought. But people Adam also solved the problem where Cain's wife came. In fact, it accounted for all sorts of things, including the puzzle of how some civilizations, because the Europeans at the time were discovering that the Egyptians had histories going way, way back before 4000 BC. Well, the authorities did not like Perrier's work at all. His book was burned and he was imprisoned until he recanted and converted to Catholicism. But he has survived. So now we get to the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3. The story itself turns on a troubling paradox. For the forbidden fruit, the text doesn't say it was an apple, by the way. Do you know how it became an apple? It's because when the Bible was translated into the translator, Jerome, alias Saint Jerome, he made a clever pun by making it an apple because the word in Latin for apple is malum, also happens to mean evil. Anyway, the forbidden fruit was not of any old tree, much less the tree of disobeying God or the tree of death or the tree of evil. The forbidden fruit, we are told for sure, it comes from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So Genesis 3 opens with the snake character. How did that get into the garden? It's a perfect place. Well, why is the snake there? Christians and Muslims that the snake is Satan. Why not allow his perfect creation contaminated right from the start by Satan? Oh, well, there was a pre-creation of the angels, remember? God couldn't get that right, but that's not mentioned there in Genesis. But the snake says of the forbidden fruit, quote, "In the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil," unquote. And sure enough, after they eat from the fruit, Genesis says the eyes of them both were opened. So clearly, before eating it, they did not know right from wrong. More to the point, before eating the fruit, Adam and Eve were not moral agents. Those were not and could be motivated by any desire to do wrong because they could not have understood that disobeying God's command was wrong. If they had a motivation, it seems likely that, like normal children, just wanted nothing more than to become like their parents. Why couldn't God just share the knowledge of good and evil with them? He obviously made them able to speak and otherwise have the capabilities that are normally acquired after years of childhood and adolescence. That's much greater evidence of the past than belly button, isn't it? Why did God want to share such knowledge with them? We hear all the time about free will, but what good is free will when you don't have an understanding of good and evil? Well, it's a story. At the threat of death, again, what could Adam and Eve have understood of death in a perfect world where nothing died? After they ate of the fruit and became moral agents, wait, before getting to that, it's important to consider that first Eve ate and then Adam. Their choices are different in an important way. This has usually been spun, certainly it was so spun by St. Augustine, as showing that Eve was to blame. Augustine was really hung up on sex and he turned it all in, turned evil and the original sin into a STD. But you know, God himself singles Eve out with additional punishment afterwards. But again, let's think about this. What was Eve's motivation for inducing Adam to eat the fruit too once her eyes opened? The story doesn't tell us. Was misery loves company and she did not want to be the only criminal in the world? Also a tradition of Adam had another wife before Eve, Lilith, but that's another story that is not in Genesis. Maybe Eve offered Adam the forbidden fruit because she realized having a moral sense was really a good thing, even godlike. If so, as she loved Adam, she would have wanted him to have that too, right? Don't all human beings even today make an effort to share their sense of right and wrong with others? It seems like people are constantly pontificating to each other about what's wrong and disagreeing about that. Isn't that an important part of who we all are? Who we all are, our sense of right and wrong. Who of us would, if we could, extinguish our morals? Would it be better not to have knowledge of good and evil? Would moral ignorance be moral bliss? This drawing here, or this painting, by the way, is from the German Renaissance painter Albrecht Dürer's famous 1504 work, Adam and Eve. Notice the cat and the mouse at Adam's feet. You see that? They're just living peacefully together, but we can imagine that cat getting ready to pounce once Adam and Eve have introduced evil into the world. But the important point is that Adam's choice was within Eve's. Here is Eve, who has eaten the fruit and evidently acquired knowledge that Adam still lacks. He sees that she's not in pain, not dying, whatever that is. He already loves and trusts her. Should he join her in this new way of being or remain as he has been to please God? Remember, too, that Eve was the only help meet for him. Remember that she was made especially for him, from him. And God had certainly not been playing the role of an intimate companion for Adam, right? There was no help meet for Adam. We might consider how it might have worked out if God had been willing to play that role to begin with, or what would have been said and done. God showed up and found that only Eve and not Adam had eaten forbidden fruit. What would God have done then? Make another woman out of another rib? But it still wouldn't be Eve. At any rate, his choice when Eve offers him the fruit was now no longer whether to obey or disobey God's command. Adam still has no moral sense in which to make peace, but Adam could choose to be loyal to God and go back sorting with the beasts, which were an help meet for him, as I said, or Adam could act on his love for and trust in his wife, Eve, whom God had given him. What do people today, they fall in love, but their parents object? It's not such a simple creation story, is it? Well, as we know, Adam chose Eve. Now, it is reasonable to suppose that living without a moral sense could be pleasant, or at least less unpleasant than living with a moral sense. And non-animals do fine with ethical philosophy, right? After all, no matter the conditions of one's existence, it would not be possible without a moral sense to say or even think, oh, this is bad and I wish it were better. On the other hand, a moral sense allows one to experience regret, shame, and guilt. For then it is possible to say and to think and to feel, I could have done better, and couldn't have done that. As Voltaire put it, the bad is the enemy of the good. And this goes to the quote that I put up last week from John Stuart Mill. Great quotation, I still think. He said, it's indisputable that the being whose capabilities of enjoyment are low has the greatest chance of having them fully satisfied. And a highly endowed being will always feel that any happiness which you look for as the world is constituted is imperfect. It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And if the fool or the pig is of a different opinion, it is only because they know their own side of the question. Very cool quote. Too bad it's not in the Bible. Too many good things not in the Bible, right? So this may be why the Genesis story of Adam and Eve has managed to maintain its hold over the human imagination for so long. Short as it is, as lacking in detail as it is, and perhaps because its brevity and simplicity allows us to wonder about and fill the blanks in various ways, it really does deal with central elements of the human condition, of what makes us human and why. There's much more we could say about it, good, bad, and otherwise. Just for example, the punishments that God metes out to the serpent, to Eve, and Adam are both troubling and puzzling. The snake is cursed to crawl on its and eat dust. What? Snakes already crawl on their bellies. And so have they ever eaten dust? Eve is cursed to give birth pain. Is it any surprise that pain relief for women in labor? Oh, it was hotly opposed by the clerics when it came along. But it's been considered suspect or wrong, even by women themselves. They want to do it, quote, natural, carry out God's curse. Thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee, says God to Eve. Well, that last is not so good, and certainly it has been used to justify a lot of not so good things. But did Eve not desire Adam already? That's a punishment. Adam is cursed with having to work for a living. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, God says. So honest, productive labor and sweating is bad? Is this why it's considered so wonderful to read as early as possible? And the hatred of many people have for work? In 1667, the English author John Milton wrote Paradise Lost, an epic poem that deals at length with the events of Genesis 2 and 3. It originally in 10 books, and I think it came out some years later in 12 books. Some say that that work is the greatest work in English literature, the greatest poem in English literature, but even better for freethinkers is this thing on the right there, Byron's 1821 Cain, deals with the events of Genesis 4. That's a somewhat less famous story of Adam and Eve's two children, Cain and Abel. Very recommended. Satan has a in that book. Stephen Greenblatt wrote a book entitled The Rise and Fall of Adam and Eve. He also wrote the book about Lucretius, The Nature of Things, which was unearthed during or the early part of the Renaissance. That book's called The Swerve. But let's close with the opening part of the prologue to this book, The Rise and Fall of Adam and Eve. Here's what Greenblatt wrote. When I was a child, my parents told me that during the priestly benediction that brings the Sabbath service to a close, we all had to bow our heads, keep our eyes down until the wise, solemn words came to an end. It was extremely important to do so because in these moments, God passed above our heads and no one who saw God face to face would live. I brooded on this prohibition. To look into the face of the Lord, I reasoned, must be the most wonderful thing any human being could experience. Nothing that I would ever see or do all the years that lay ahead of me would even approach one supreme vision. I reached momentous decision. I would raise my eyes and see God for myself. It would be fatal, I understood, but the cost was surely not too high. I did not dare to tell my parents of my determination, for I knew that they would be try to dissuade me. I did not even tell my older brother, Marty, since I feared he would know my secret. Have to act alone. Several Saturdays passed before I could muster the courage, but finally one morning, standing with my head bowed, I conquered my fear of death. Slowly, slowly, while the rabbi intoned the ancient blessings, I rubbed my eyes. The air above my head was completely empty. And I found I was by no means alone in looking about the sanctuary. Many of the worshipers were going around, staring out the windows, or gesturing to friends and mouthing greetings. I was filled with outrage. I have been lied to. Many years have gone by since this moment, and I have never recovered the naive faith that led me to prepare to sacrifice my life for a vision of God. But something lives in me on the other side of lost illusions. I have been fascinated throughout my life by the stories that we humans invent in an attempt to make sense of our existence, and I have come to understand that the term lie is a woefully inadequate description of either the motive or the content of these stories, even at their most fantastical. Well, I think there's an interesting parallel here with the story of Adam. Do you see it? Greenblatt counts being willing to risk his life to see if his parents were right, could catch a glimpse of God. Gaining understanding, especially of things we care deeply about, is an important good. It is paying a lot for. Much of human history has to do with people learning important things, often at a high cost. This truth is an important theme for our storytelling species. Even more important, though, is putting to good use learn. And that, too, can have its cost. Please think about that. Our principles are, of course, reason, learning to live by it. A lot of it to it, much more than the Bible, that's for sure. A thorough enjoyment of life and each other, not to miss out on, we're going to always miss out on some things life has to offer, but of what we have available to us, and of course appreciation for what we have in every respect. And finally, love, the value, meaning, and purpose that we attach to others and the things in our lives that we consider important. We'll move on to some discussion here, and reminder, I got an email from Diana actually talking about how our church take a strong stand against Alex Jones and that. But I will just say, we know you can think for yourself about political subjects, and we like all to discuss political subjects, but it's a vast field, and we should kind of save our invective and emotion and focus on what the public policies are that we think are important. Of course, civil liberties, laws, and court decisions. Racism is certainly a thing that we've taken a very, very strong stance about with the church, and we had a whole sermon on that, which I suppose we could repeat at some point. But just as I referred to earlier, this whole business of race, which caused the human race, which is one human race, so much misery comes out of the Bible. It comes out of that whole business, the curse of Ham, and how the Christians tried to make sense of the Native Americans and so forth. So I think facts and ideological differences make discussion unproductive, and we always respect others with whom we disagree. I had a patient the other day who even told me to my face, watches Alex Jones and thinks he's great. And all I could say was that, well, I do think it's good to doubt what the government tells you, but you should doubt what Alex Jones tells you too. Disagreement should not be antagonistic, and we should strive to be dispassionate and have a certain academic attitude of things. We're thinkers. Let me just go through a couple of things here that happened on August 30th. In the year 70, soldiers of, this is a quotation now from a dictionary of the Roman Empire, the soldiers of Titus' legions engaged in a struggle with Jewish insurgents just outside the Second Temple of Jerusalem. One of the Romans caught up in the fray, threw a firebrand into the building, and a fire broke out. Quietly, Titus had ordered it. The following day, anyone caught within the boundaries was killed, and the treasury gates and portico were also set on fire. All the valuable goods from the blaze were confiscated and later just in Rome for Titus' triumph. So that's that famous destruction of the temple, which we know the Gospels are written after this because the destruction of the temple is quote unquote predicted by that. Also in this date in 1800, Gabriel Prosser had postponed a slave rebellion. This guy was a slave. He posted the rebellion he planned for the day in 1800 because of rain. The slaves' owners were at suspicion of the uprising. Two slaves told their owner about the plan, and he warned Virginia's governor, one James Monroe at the time, who called out the state militia. Gabriel escaped downriver to Norfolk, but he was spotted and betrayed there by another slave because of the reward offered by the government. By the way, that slave did not get, at least not the entire reward. Gabriel Prosser was apprehended, returned to Richmond, but he refused to submit, and he and his two brothers and another 3 other slaves were hanged. And this under the authority of the founder, James Monroe. Why aren't they tearing down statues of him? It hasn't come up yet, but boy, what a guy. Then in 1909, on this date, the Burgess Shale fossils were discovered by Charles Doolittle Walcott. For those of you who don't know, the Burgess Shale fossils were the basis of about the so-called Cambrian explosion. All these very primitive animals, including a very small primitive animal, which we think is the forebear of all vertebrates, of which we are vertebrates, of course. Stephen Jay Gould, the famous paleontologist, wrote a little book called Wonderful Life, all about the Burgess Shale. If you haven't read it, put that on your list. In 1916, Ernest Shackleton completed the rescue of his crew from Elephant Island. Boy, there's a tale of daring do. A guy who's intending to cross the continent of Antarctica, got stuck in the ice with his crew in a lifeboat to Elephant Island, an uninhabited island in the Antarctic area. And the only way he could get help was to hundreds of miles across the sea in the one lifeboat that they had left to South Georgia, where there was a whaling station, but they landed on the wrong side of the island and had to cross the mountains of the island down to the whaling station on the other before finally they could be recognized that they'd had this shipwreck and initiate the ultimate rescue of his crew on this date in 1916 from Elephant Island. 1797, Mary Shelley was born, very appropriate for thinking about Adam and Eve. She's the author of Frankenstein, which was, of course, a wonderful new trope that, in a way, kind of rewrote the story of Adam and Eve with Victor Frankenstein, the so-called villain, as playing the role of God. And also, this is the day, celebration, or observance rather, which is the International Day of the Disappeared. All the people that have disappeared because of rotten, tyrannical rulers that just up and imprison them who know where, they just disappear. Reminder that Freethought is not free. There's a rainbow colored box. I got around to amending this slide. Please visit the PayPal link site. Thank you so much to all of you who have been generous and donated to the church, because it really does depend on your continued support for its maintenance, feeding, and producing material like this that we'll put up on YouTube. There's reasons to give us your money, but the main one, just all of them, all the reasons funnel into this one, that we're doing together what none of us can do on our own. And plus, you'll be darned to heck if you don't give me money. Help us promote your values, demonstrate your commitment, and be the future to see. Remember, nobody has more money than God, so they don't need your money. And then we'll turn it into question and answer discussion. And I'd love to hear what you all think about this story of Adam and Eve. It's just kind of fascinating. And when you think about it, create a lot of art. In fact, it was a great excuse for Renaissance painters and artists to make images of the naked human body. I must have enjoyed that. So much more goes into it as well.